Welcome back to Nocturnal Knowledge. Last time, we journeyed through the intricate layers of medieval society, understanding the hierarchy that defined life in 14th century England. If you missed that exploration into social structure, you can find that video linked in the description below. Today, we're stepping off the dusty scrolls and into the very heart of the medieval experience, its sensory reality. We'll be exploring the contrasting worlds of bustling cities, quiet villages, and the shaping of the land itself, drawing from Ian Mortimer's The Time Traveler's Guide to Medieval England. Prepare to engage all your senses as we uncover the sights, sounds, and even smells of this distant era. If you're finding this journey through time enlightening, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more historical explorations. Let's immerse ourselves in the medieval sensory world. The medieval sensory experience, cities, villages, and the land, first impressions, the stark contrasts of a medieval city. To step into a medieval city for the first time is to confront a world of stark, almost overwhelming contrasts. It is an assault on all the senses, an experience that will likely shatter any romanticized notions you may hold. From a distance, the first structure to capture your eye will invariably be the cathedral. It rises from the landscape, a colossal testament to faith and ambition, dwarfing every other building. Its scale is immense, its towers reaching towards the heavens, its pointed arches and flying buttresses speaking of architectural daring. Even amidst the scaffolding of ongoing construction, its sheer presence is awe-inspiring, casting a long shadow over the surrounding hundreds of houses that appear like mere pebbles at the base of a great mountain. The 30 or so parish churches, while numerous, seem humbled by comparison, their low towers barely breaking the skyline of the tightly packed roofs. As you draw nearer, the city walls, often surmounted by imposing gatehouses, make their statement of civic pride and authority. These are not merely decorative features, they are tangible barriers, signifying the transition from the relative freedom of the open road to the jurisdiction of the mayor and the rule of law within. Guarding the perimeter, you might see the imposing silhouette of the castle, the seat of royal power and order. The collective impression of these fortifications, the walls, the towers, the distant cathedral, is one of immense strength, a formidable display of organized power and societal structure. But as you approach the city gates, a less pleasant sensory experience begins to intrude. The muddy road you've been following often crosses a brook, and it's here, along its banks, that the reality of medieval sanitation becomes jarringly apparent. You'll see refuse strewn everywhere, broken pottery, animal bones, entrails, and most disturbingly, human feces. Townsfolk, in their daily efforts to dispose of waste, haul it to the water's edge and pitch it into the stream. In some places, the banks are slick with mud and refuse, becoming literal quagmires. You might even witness men tipping barrels of excrement directly into the water, while pigs root contentedly through the garbage. This is no pristine environment. This is the stark reality of Shitbrook, which is not merely descriptive but a profound indicator of the city's contrasting nature. This immediate confrontation with filth, set against the backdrop of burgeoning grandeur, is the defining characteristic of the medieval city. It is a place of paradoxes, a caricature of the human body itself, smelly, dirty, yet commanding, rich, and often decadent. As you hasten across the bridge over the tainted brook and approach the gates, these contrasts only intensify. A group of children, their faces grimy and hair unkempt, might rush towards you, clamoring for attention, vying to lead your horse, perhaps even pretending to recognize you or hail from your home region. Their clothes are filthy, their feet even more so, testament to the constant struggle against the mud and debris of the streets. Beyond the gates, the city is a bewildering sensory experience. The eyes are dazzled by the sheer scale of the great churches and the wealth displayed within their stained glass windows, yet the nostrils are assaulted by the stench from polluted watercourses and town ditches. The relative quiet of the countryside, with its birdsong and wind, gives way to a cacophony of sound: the calls of travelers, the shouts of town criers, the cries of laborers, and the ubiquitous ringing of church bells. On market days, you'll be jostled by country folk, their boisterous revelry echoing from the taverns. The presence of the dead is also a potent first impression. At crossroads outside the city, desiccated bodies of executed thieves might hang from gibbets, left as stark warnings. At the principal gates of regional capitals, the heads and limbs of traitors are put on display, gruesome trophies serving as a constant reminder of the state's brutal enforcement of order. Entering York, for instance, you might see the blackened heads of criminals impaled on poles above the gates, their eyes plucked out by birds, their limbs hanging by ropes, a stark visual testament to the state's brutal enforcement of order. Yet, the moment you step under the shadow of a city gatehouse, a different perspective can emerge. In Exeter, for example, South Street opens up, a wide and handsome prospect, lined with fine houses and inns. Gable ends of steeply angled roofs meet the street with an appealing regularity. You might notice the Church of Holy Trinity, or the elegant townhouse of an abbot, or rows of merchants' houses with their shops, displaying silks and expensive fabrics through the covered shop fronts. The ground beneath your feet might be uneven, dusty in dry weather, muddy after rain, but then your attention is drawn to the sheer dynamism of the scene. Ponies and pack horses laden with grain ambling towards the marketplace, priests in their robes passing by, perhaps a Dominican friar preaching to an attentive circle of admirers. Workers guide sheep and cattle or steer carts laden with produce towards market stalls. The city is alive, teeming with people engaged in a multitude of activities. Within moments, the memory of decapitated traders and the stench of Shitbrook can recede, replaced by the vibrant energy of commerce. You might even notice an absence of animal dung in the streets, a result of diligent servants shoveling it from in front of their masters' houses. The streets themselves are a testament to the city's economic life, packed with trader shops, often tiny rooms no more than 40 square feet, distinguished by projecting signs to guide the illiterate. These signs might be paintings of the items on sale, or three-dimensional objects like a bushel for an alehouse, or a bandaged arm marking a surgeon's premises. The air rings the clang of blacksmiths' hammers and the shouts of their apprentices. Butchers, their leather aprons stained, display meat exposed to the sun, carcasses hanging in the shade. It is in these very streets, amidst this bustling activity, that your preconceptions of medieval England begin to unravel. The range of costumes is extraordinary, from the simple russet of peasants to the rich reds, yellows, and blues of merchants and their wives, perhaps even a knight or nobleman. Their languages and accents mingling in the hubbub of trade create a cosmopolitan air. Foreign merchants are a common sight, and even in smaller towns you'll hear French and English spoken, and occasionally Latin and Cornish. Amid the din, the town crier calls from the crossroads. Friends share jokes, and street vendors hawk their wares with practiced cries, "Hot peas cods," or "Rushes fair and green." Despite the vibrancy, you might be surprised by the relative small populations of even the larger towns. Exeter, with its cathedral, had only around 2,600 citizens within its walls in 1377. London, by contrast, with over 40,000 inhabitants, was a true metropolis, comparable to continental giants like Paris. Yet these towns are far from quiet or insignificant. Inns draw a constant stream of travelers: clergy, merchants, messengers, judges, clerks, artisans, pilgrims, preachers, and musicians. Add to this the influx of local people from the surrounding countryside for markets and fairs, and the daytime population of a city could easily double or triple its permanent residents. Walking through the narrow, shadowed alleys, you encounter another layer of urban life. Houses here jetted out over the narrow thoroughfares, creating an almost claustrophobic darkness. These alleys,
sometimes no more than 6 or 7 feet wide, offer little light and likely no private outdoor space. In winter, rain turns these spaces into muddy puddles, and rivulets of water carry refuse into the street. The stench of decay fills the air. Descending further into the warrens of even narrower lanes, sometimes only 3 or 4 feet wide, you find the poorest dwellings, low, single-story timber buildings with no proper foundations. Shutters hang askew, roofs are covered in moss and lichen. The paths leading to them are little more than stinking drains. These are the most dilapidated buildings, yet because they are unseen by visitors, they remain unrepaired. Inside these gloom-filled rooms, often just one, divided for children and adults, the struggle for existence is palpable. Amidst this densely packed human landscape, you will also encounter high walls, not the city's outer defenses, but those enclosing monasteries, cathedrals, or the homes of the wealthy. A significant portion of any city's area is often given to religious precincts, royal castles, and parish churches, leaving a scarcity of space for the majority. The immigrant population is squeezed into cramped tenements, a stark contrast to the wide, prominent streets where the wealthy reside. As you observe the architecture, the narrow, tall houses lining the main streets, the shop fronts that transform into display counters, the distinctive signs guiding the illiterate, and the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's forge, the sheer density of life becomes apparent. The language spoken, the clothes worn, the very sounds and smells of the city all combine to create an experience that is both bewildering and utterly captivating. This is the initial, visceral encounter with the medieval city, a place of immense energy, deep social divisions, and a constant, palpable struggle between order and chaos, between aspiration and degradation.
Yet, the moment you pass under the imposing city gate, the grim realities can momentarily recede. Within Exeter's walls, South Street presents a wide, handsome prospect. Here stand fine houses and inns, their steep roofs meeting the street. The Church of Holy Trinity, the Abbot's townhouse, and rows of merchants' houses, their shops displaying silks and fine fabrics, create an image of prosperity. Ponies and pack horses laden with goods amble towards the marketplace. Priests in their habits pass by, and a friar might be preaching to a captivated audience. Workers drive their livestock to market, and vendors hawk their wares, hot peas cods and ribs of beef and many a pie. Amidst this vibrant activity, the stench of Shitbrook seems to fade, and the streets, surprisingly, are largely free of animal dung. Servants diligently shovel it from in front of their masters' houses. The city streets are a hive of commerce. Traders' shops are tightly packed, sometimes mere rooms of less than 40 square feet, distinguished by projecting signs. A painted knife for a cutler, a bushel for an alehouse, a bandaged arm for a surgeon. From Smithen Street, the clang of blacksmiths' hammers and the shouts of apprentices echo. Butcher's Row, or the Shambles, displays carcasses in the sun, with joints hanging in the shade behind the counters. The sounds of the cleaver striking the board punctually mark a rhythm of the day. Here, in the heart of the city, preconceptions begin to shatter. The range of costumes is extraordinary, from peasants in russet to richly dressed merchants and their wives. The languages and accents heard in the city add to its cosmopolitan air, with foreign merchants frequently present, and French, Latin, and even Cornish spoken alongside English. Over the hubbub of trade, the town crier calls out news, and laughter rings from friends sharing a joke. Despite this bustling activity, the actual number of permanent residents in most towns is surprisingly small. Exeter, the 24th largest community in England in 1377, has only 2,600 inhabitants within its walls. London, with over 40,000, is an exception, a true metropolis when compared to continental cities exceeding 50,000. Yet towns like Exeter are far from quiet. Inns greatly increase the transient population.
hosting a constant stream of travelers from all walks of life: clergy, merchants, messengers, king's officers, judges, clerks, artisans, pilgrims, preachers, and musicians. Add to this the influx of local people on market days, and the daytime population can easily double or triple that of the permanent residents, swelling manifold during fairs. The sheer variety of wares and services, metalwork, leatherwork, legal services, spices, make the city a vibrant, dynamic organism. The housing within the city walls mirrors the stark contrasts outside. The grandest houses, often 3 stories high, stand on the widest and cleanest streets leading from the main gates. But turn into the narrow alleys, sometimes only 6 or 7 feet wide, and the picture changes dramatically. Jetties from upper stories overhang the thoroughfare, blocking out light and creating damp, smelly, and unsavory conditions. Rivulets of water, carrying liquid from buckets of offal and kitchen rubbish, trickle into the street. Deeper still, into warrens of even narrower lanes, lie the poorest dwellings, low, single-storied timber buildings with no proper foundations, subdivided into tiny rented rooms. Their shutters hang askew, their roofs are dilapidated, covered in lichen and streaked with birdlime. The paths leading to them are little more than stinking drains, open sewers. These are the most dilapidated buildings, neglected by authorities because they are out of sight of visitors and the wealthy. Inside a single room, a family might live, with a small section partitioned for children and the rest serving for cooking and sleeping. Toilets are usually absent, just a bucket to be emptied elsewhere. The inhabitants spend their days working, eating in the street, and urinating and defecating where they can, ideally in municipal toilets. Their children, growing up in the street, are the urchins who first greet you at the city gate. The city's layout is also segmented. High walls divide precincts. Monasteries, castles, cathedrals, and the homes of the wealthy are often enclosed. Monasteries alone can occupy a third of a city's area. This scarcity of space means that immigrants are squeezed into small tenements, often constructed on the sites of destroyed houses or alongside churchyards. Few in these slums can afford to move to the more prosperous districts. Back in the market square, the houses are tall and narrow, typically 15 or 16 feet wide and 3 or 4 stories high. Shops occupy the ground floor, their lower halves hinge down to form display counters during trading hours. The space behind the counter might be a workshop or merely storage. Only the wealthiest merchants dealing in bulk seaborne goods have separate houses and warehouses. These townhouses often display fine decorative touches: tiled or slate-hung upper stories, carved wooden beams, coats of arms, and heraldic beasts. Then, turning a corner, you might encounter entirely different dwellings, larger houses set sideways to the street, with imposing gatehouses and crenellated towers, or long wooden houses with projecting oriel windows. These are the homes of the wealthiest citizens, often clustered in the most prominent streets, alongside townhouses of financiers, knights, and archdeacons. Rebuilt in stone with chimneys and glazed windows, these mansions represent the growing affluence and changing architectural tastes of the period. Beyond these varied residences, one finds the smart houses of canons within cathedral precincts, complete with scriptoria, chapels, and libraries. The royal castle, the bishop's palace, and the College of Vicars Choral all add to the city's architectural diversity. Even the towers of the gatehouses provide accommodation for civic servants. At the very bottom, barns and stables offer lodging to travelers, and houses are frequently subdivided, with a dozen poor families occupying what was once a single trader's dwelling. The suburbs also offer a variety of structures,
perhaps showing even greater variety than those within the walls, despite their sparser population. Finally, before leaving, observe the streets. They are the primary, almost exclusive public spaces. There are no public parks or gardens, and large squares are rare except as marketplaces. The street is the common domain, where news is disseminated by the town crier, jugglers perform, and friars preach. The market cross is the hub of this network of conversation, gossip flowing freely in lanes, alleys, shops, and at water conduits. It is the interplay of people within these spaces, as much as the buildings themselves, that defines the medieval city.
Imagine stepping beyond the bustling town and city, venturing into the heart of medieval England. Here, the landscape unfolds in a vast, irregular patchwork. Gone are the neat hedged fields of modern times. Instead, in most of the country, you would encounter immense fields, stretching between 700 and 1,200 acres, entirely unfenced. Within these colossal expanses, individual strips of land, each roughly an acre, were meticulously maintained by separate tenants, resembling a gigantic allotment system. These strips, grouped into furlongs, were separated by bulks, essentially paths. The rhythm of cultivation was dictated by the three-field system, but it wasn't entire fields that lay fallow, rather individual furlongs within them. 2 out of every 3 furlongs would be sown with grain, predominantly wheat, oats, and barley, while the third would rest, serving as pasture for cattle, sheep, goats, or pigs. Surrounding these vast agricultural areas, bounded by ditches and earth banks, lay the commons, stretches of grassland for sheep, or woodlands providing vital fuel and building materials. Low-lying meadows were dedicated to the growth of hay. Commons and meadows were ubiquitous across England, with thousands of upland acres devoted to sheep grazing. You might occasionally see smaller, enclosed fields, marked by stone walls or hedged banks, used for corralling animals during the winter months. However, these enclosed spaces were the exception rather than the rule, allowing livestock to freely roam and, often to the frustration of villagers and the haywards tasked with their protection, to trample over the very crops they were meant to safeguard. The woodlands, though not vastly more extensive than today, were intensely managed. Every inch of medieval woodland was carefully utilized. Some areas were sectioned off and subjected to coppicing, the practice of repeatedly cutting trees down to near ground level, protected by high earth banks, topped with hedges to prevent deer and other animals from consuming the new growth. The coppiced trees yielded poles for charcoal burning, fencing, and firewood, the sole means of warmth for many through the long winter. Other woodlands were managed for timber, with clearings made to encourage trees to grow tall and straight, their great oaks prized for their potential to span wide spaces with single beams. Fallen wood was scarce, especially near villages, as tenants exercised their manorial rights to gather every usable twig. As you explore these woods, you might notice the absence of many tree species familiar to us. Medieval England was largely devoid of conifers, save for Scotch pine, yew, and juniper. Evergreens were rare, leaving the winter skyline stark. Imported timbers like pine or fir boards came from Scandinavia. The trees that did dominate were those introduced during the Bronze Age and Roman periods, mingled with those that recolonized Britain after the last Ice Age. Rowan, ash, alder, field maple, hazel, sweet chestnut, white beam, aspen, poplars, silver birch, beech, lime, walnut, elm, and, of course, the venerable oak.
Both sessile and pedunculate varieties of oak were common, the latter being particularly valued for building and shipbuilding. The landscape itself was not static. Hillsides were being cleared for cultivation, and some were being enclosed for the more efficient management of sheep flocks. Gentle slopes, once growing oats, were increasingly manured for wheat. Even flatlands were subject to change, with vast areas of marshland, such as the Lincolnshire Fens and Somerset Levels, being reclaimed through drainage. This transformation was driven by a combination of factors: human endeavor, the natural silting of rivers, coastal erosion, and even the subtle shifts of climate. A mere degree Celsius drop in average annual temperature by 1400 led to colder weather, increased rainfall, flooded roads, and ruined crops, contributing to famines that devastated the population. Disease, however, was the most significant factor reshaping the rural landscape. After 1348, waves of plague depopulated manors to such an extent that land management practices were fundamentally altered. Villages were abandoned, their timbers robbed from houses, leaving roofless cob walls to collapse. In some cases, entire communities vanished, the ruined towers of their parish churches standing as solitary reminders of what had once been. These changes dramatically illustrate how deeply the land and its inhabitants were interconnected, a dynamic relationship constantly shaped by the forces of nature and the passage of human lives.
Villages, the warp and weft of rural life. In the tapestry of medieval England, woven with threads of city and countryside, it is the village that forms the very warp and weft of daily life for the majority. While the grand cathedrals and bustling markets of towns and cities capture the imagination, the true heart of England beats in its thousands of rural communities. Forget the romanticized postcard images of thatched cottages nestled amidst rolling hills. A medieval village was a far more complex and, at times, a far less picturesque entity. The layout of a village was not one of picturesque scattering, but a logical arrangement dictated by necessity. Houses, typically single-story and rarely exceeding 16 feet from front to back, were clustered. Each toft, the plot of land on which the house and its garden stood, was positioned with purpose. Many stood alongside lanes leading to their allotted acres in the open fields, ensuring easy access for carts and oxen. Mills were sited where rivers flowed, and houses were often placed near wells. Frost pockets, areas prone to early or late frosts, and land susceptible to flooding also influenced settlement patterns. The village therefore developed not by whim, but by the contours of necessity. The construction of these homes varied, influenced by regional availability of materials. In the granite-rich areas of Dartmoor, houses were built of stone and thatched with reed or bracken, the latter requiring annual replacement. In parts of Cornwall, slate blocks and slabs were favoured. However, in most regions, timber-framed houses thatched with straw were the norm. These structures, often 25 to 40 feet in length, could range from simple square one-room cottages to more substantial two-bay yeoman's houses with a two-story wing. At the lower end, a widow's cottage might be a mere 13 feet square, a single room with a porch and a hen house. In some regions, like the West Country, the distinct longhouse design persisted, accommodating both cattle and family under one long roof. The aesthetic of these homes was driven by practicality, not ornamentation. Smoke curling from crude louvers in the roof was a sign of life, a visual cue that firewood was plentiful and warmth secured. Thatch, often laden with moss and lichen, extended over the cob or clay walls to protect them from the elements. Gardens, tucked behind small fences, were not for leisure but for sustenance, growing essential vegetables and herbs like onions, garlic, peas, and cabbages. Rainwater, collected from roofs and barrels, was often the cleanest water available. This practicality, this focus on the necessities of life being close at hand, was, to the medieval eye, a form of beauty in itself. The social fabric of the village was equally pragmatic, though not without its complexities. While superficially appearing similar, village houses and their inhabitants held variations in size, purpose, and construction methods. Regional differences were pronounced. However, at the heart of village life lay the church. Often situated on one side of the settlement, usually to the east, the lord of the manor's residence, the manor house or barton, stood as the center of the manorial economy, where tenants paid rents and dues. Beyond the church and manor house, other buildings formed the hamlet-like clusters around them: threshing barns, haylofts, ox houses, brew houses, stables, and hen houses. The advent of the 13th century brought profound changes, particularly in the wake of the devastating Black Death. By the 1350s and 1360s, many villages bore the scars of depopulation. Abandoned houses, robbed of their timbers, and with roofless cob walls collapsing into the mud, were a common sight on the outskirts of communities. For those villages that survived, the economic impact was severe. Lords, faced with fewer tenants and reduced rents, began to convert arable land to pasture for sheep, a process that could transform villages from bustling agricultural centers into sparsely populated hamlets, with only the ruined church tower serving as a reminder of what once was. It is estimated that over 1,000 villages were deserted and fell into ruin by the end of the century, a stark testament to the plague's impact. The scale of this devastation was immense. A village that might have supported hundreds of people could, after the plague, find itself with only a handful of survivors. The loss of life meant a drastic reduction in the workforce, leading to the abandonment of land and the decay of infrastructure. Even prosperous parish churches sometimes fell into disrepair, their aisles or chapels being demolished simply because the remaining congregation could no longer afford their upkeep, shrinking the sacred space to fit their diminished means. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming loss, life continued. While the immediate aftermath of the plague was one of abandonment and collapse, the survivors had to adapt. The scarcity of labor, paradoxically, led to greater freedom and higher wages for those who remained, altering the manorial system and allowing some peasants to acquire more land and social mobility. However, the landscape itself bore the indelible marks of this mortality, with deserted homesteads and overgrown fields serving as constant reminders of the dramatic demographic shift. The village, a seemingly timeless entity, was, in fact, a dynamic and often brutal testament to the resilience and vulnerability of human life.
From the bustling, often pungent streets of the medieval city to the quiet, ordered fields and villages of the countryside, we've experienced the sensory richness of 14th century England. We've seen the stark contrasts that defined urban life and the fundamental rhythms that shaped rural existence. Thanks for joining me on this journey. And as always, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.